Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to cross over today to Newport Beach, California, to catch up with super agent and premier sports agent, Leigh Steinberg. Welcome to the podcast, Leigh.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, good morning here from Bangkok. I'm sitting here with my coffee. I know it's afternoon there in California, and I'm looking forward to going through and really unpacking literally almost 50 years of your amazing career in the world of sports. And for some of our listeners who might not know you, let me do a quick introduction. And then, of course, we go into the stories itself here. So Leigh, as I mentioned earlier, is best known for his work working with athletes and creating brands out of them. So he is a sports agent, as we call him. And to really illustrate that further, Leigh was the real live inspiration for the Oscar-winning movie Jerry Maguire. So he is the Jerry Maguire in the movie, which is actually, by the way, one of my favorite movies. I love that. I have a little story to that myself later. Leigh's worked across his career with everyone from American football, basketball, baseball, hockey, boxing, and golf. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail. In total has secured over $4 billion worth of contracts for his 300-plus athletes, and also generated almost $850 million worth for charities around the world. Leigh's been featured on 60 Minutes, Larry King Live, the Today Show, and many other, of course, magazines, and of course is a speaker within the industry. So let's get started and let's hear from the man himself how it all started for yourself coming out of Berkeley University there. And let's make sure I got this year right here, in 1973. So, Leigh, please take us a bit back, doing your doctorate degree in law in Berkeley. You got the Vietnam War and also other crazy things going on there. But, tell us a bit about it.
So I went undergrad to Berkeley in the tumultuous days of the 1960s. And I was student body president in the height of the Vietnam War, and the governor of California was Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
And every time we demonstrated against the war, he cracked down. And I learned everything I needed to learn about the art of negotiating from dealing with then Governor, later President Reagan.
Right.
I was a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dorm working my way through law school. And they moved the freshman football team into the dorm, and one of the students was the quarterback on the team, Steve Bartkowski. Right. And in 1975, he became the very first pick in the first round of the National Football League draft. And he asked me to represent him. I was out of law school a couple of years.
Right.
And there really wasn't an organized field of sports agentry. As a matter of fact, franchises could hang up the phone and say they don't deal with agents. But we had a competitive football league, the World Football League, and it enabled us to get the largest rookie contract in NFL history. And wow. We flew to Atlanta to sign the contract the next day, and there were Klieg lights flashing in the sky like for a movie premiere. A huge crowd was pressed up against the police line, and the first thing we heard was, "We interrupt the evening news to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview." And,
wow, okay. That's a nice start to the industry here.
I knew we weren't in Berkeley anymore, and my dad had raised me with two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was try to make a meaningful difference and help people who couldn't help themselves. And so I saw that the athletes were the celebrities and the movie stars. And I thought, if I could get them to go back to the high school communities that helped shape them, set up a scholarship fund or work with a church or Boys and Girls Club, they could put down roots and make a difference in the quality of life. And if they would go back to the university communities, and again, set up a scholarship fund and work with the alums. They could lay a foundation for future second career. And at the pro level, asked them to establish a charitable foundation with the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders, and take on a cause. And so running back work done, just put the 200th single mother and their family into the first home they'll ever own by making a down payment. So that was 48 years ago, and 64 first-round draft picks in football ago.
Yeah, and I think, again, obviously having done my homework online, your charitable part and the philanthropy part definitely comes across very strongly. That I think I've read many times that you, in many cases, you only taking athletes who have that sort of vision as well, right? Who want to give back, and I think you even maybe walked away from clients who don't share that same passion. Is that sort of correct?
So we profile players looking for those with a big heart. And because of their profile, they can trigger imitative behavior, especially in rebellious adolescents. So the heavyweight boxer Lennox Lewis, we had to do a public service announcement that said, "Real men don't hit women." And that could do more to trigger behavioral change in rebellious adolescents than 1,000 authority figures ever could.
Yeah, I love that. And especially in today's world, where the word ESG, right, especially the S part in it, social is such an important thing for companies, for people to invest in project. And I do believe, like what you just pointed out, that the social aspect of sports and the message which athletes can send out is so much bigger than probably anyone else can do. So I and you've been doing this for, as I said, over 40 years already before that ever became a hot topic. So I really like that. Now let's go. So you've done your first big deal here. You're already on national TV now. Where do you go from there? What happens after that? Because I do recall, again, reading that at that time you weren't really a company yet, right? I think you were literally working out of your parents' house, and so you really was. It's not like you have this big law firm there with people. So how do you go from cutting this deal with someone who goes to school with you to the next level here?
Well, I figured out pretty quickly that quarterback was a position in football that led to ancillary revenue streams. They had the most profile. They signed the biggest contracts for the longest period of time. They did endorsements. So I started aggregating quarterbacks in football, and then quickly started baseball, and then basketball. And pretty soon it grew and grew and grew. And then I realized the key in business was to start being able to put people around me that the world recognized as superstars, so that we could grow. And pretty soon we had half the starting quarterbacks in football, and were able to start signing the very first pick in the first round of the NFL draft. And the charitable programs grew and grew, and started growing in different sports. So I did boxing and Olympic athletes, the skater Brian Boitano, and then wrote my first best-selling book on the art of negotiating, winning with integrity, how to get what you want without losing your soul. And we started to add more and more agents to the firm, and started to spread into a variety of different sports. And then I really felt like franchises that were wedded to cities shouldn't move. So I went up to San Francisco that was about to lose the San Francisco Giants, and helped them save the team. So it was sold to a group in Tampa Bay, but Mayor Jordan asked me to see if I could convince the National League it was against the best interest to have the franchise abandon the city. And we had to put an ownership group together and a stadium plan. And eventually we were able to save the team. And I got sued for $3 billion, but talk about blood out of a turnip. But at any rate, we saved that team and then did the same for the Oakland A's. And then I led the battle to save the LA Rams. And it stepped out of the role and became more of a steward of sport.
Right. Yeah, and again, this is sort of where, we're going through obviously the different decades here of your career, and we're still sort of in the 80s here when you did some of this, I believe, right? What you just mentioned was the San Francisco Giants and certain other things. How did that come about? I mean, you are a lawyer by training, obviously, therefore you're not just looking to, work on contracts for athletes. But how do you switch into, now trying to save teams and working with cities to do that? Was it just by coincidence, or how did it all come about?
I always thought that my role had to be bigger than simply looking at the narrow interests of contracts, but to be a steward of the sport. Right. And so, for example, I went to owners and said, we're looking at this wrong. The real battle in sports is not labor versus management. And if all we do is have acrimonious negotiations that pit players against teams, we're just pushing fans away. Right. And if all we do is have bad collective bargaining, which pits millionaires against billionaires, we're just turning off fans. What we really should be about is, can we grow the sport? Can we figure out ways to do enormous TV contracts and build brand new stadia with ancillary revenue stream and use the internet and create things like NFL or Major League Baseball networks? And I ought to be the ally with owners together to build revenue streams and brand. And so we formed sort of an unofficial alliance to see how we could not have bad negotiations, not have strikes, never cut off our primary product, and build together. So it was a different approach to representing players, which is, I had the big stars, they had the teams, let's grow the pie.
Right. Let's work together rather than against each other. I really like that. I think it's a really great way to look at it, where your role is not just let's get the most money for my clients, which of course makes you money too, but to work together. I think I really like that angle there. Now, before we get into a bit more of that, then how that obviously manifested itself over those 40 years, let's talk maybe just let's throw some names around here of athletes you have represented in the different sports, which the world would recognize. So I'm sure the list is long, but maybe give us a couple of your biggest American football stars or baseball players, basketball, boxing you mentioned already, Lennox Lewis earlier. And maybe in the Olympic sports.
Well, in football, for example, I have 12 players in the Hall of Fame. Quarterbacks Warren Moon, Steve Young, Troy Aikman, wow. Currently Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa. We have players like in the Hall of Fame, Derek Thomas, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith, Howie Long, John Lynch, Tony Gonzalez. In baseball, we had CC Sabathia, Pudge Rodriguez, Will Clark, Manny Ramirez. In ice skating, Brian Boitano, Kerry Strug. In Olympics, in boxing, we mentioned Lennox Lewis, but Oscar De La Hoya. Right. And anyway, casts of thousands.
Yeah. Lots of amazing superstars there. Now, the company, and when it all started, I believe was called Steinberg, Murat, and Dunn. Let's talk a bit
Yes.
about that because, again, and I don't know at what point in time exactly you partnered up with the three other gentlemen there, and then obviously the firm, was around for a reasonably long time until it was sold. Let's just talk a bit about it because, again, this is an important part, I think, of your career, which also later on created some challenges. And in the podcast, we always love to not just hear of all the great things which worked, but also the things which didn't. And I'm sure someone with a career like yourself, there were these moments. So, Mr. Jeff Murad and David Dunn, your business partners there when it all started, how was it just three of you lawyers and going, let's get together and build a firm, or different skill sets? How did that come together?
Well, Jeff Morad was my partner for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
And together. Later, David Dunn came. But Jeff really ran our baseball practice. And we probably would have been together forever, but his aspiration was to own a baseball team. And so at the end, he became minority partner and CEO of the Arizona Diamondbacks baseball team.
Okay.
And later he owned the San Diego Padres. But together we created some interesting businesses. In the infancy of the internet, we created the first athlete online business called Athlete Direct. And we took the leading baseball player at that time, who was Ken Griffey Jr., and the leading basketball player, Michael Jordan, and football quarterbacks. And for the very first time, you could go online and through AOL and read their weekly diaries, and you could see their about their charitable foundation. Okay. And we designed an e-commerce application, and we put a couple $100,000 in R&D into it, and then sold it to venture capitalists a few years later for like $25 million. We then created a big marketing company and sold that later. We created a information system where if you lived in Los Angeles but you were a New York Giant fan, you could get information about that. So we entrepreneurially created a whole series of businesses that we dreamed up and then sold them to venture capitalists, and then ultimately sold our firm. And then David Dunn and some of the younger agents got discontented, and they left and formed their own firm. And so really, if you have younger people in your firm, you have to be careful to give them equity and everything that you might want, whether it's name recognition, equity, compensation. You have to be careful to give the younger lawyers. And I thought I had done that, but evidently not enough.
Yeah, and again, having had conversation with Donald Dell and David Falk and others, which are similar, obviously, in some sense of what you're doing. Again, some of those stories have come across there as well, of course, right? And there are, they're well recorded in many ways, the split between the two of them and other things. And and I guess that is always the tough part, right? The agents have so much control, right? There with the players, with the athletes. How do you keep them all together? And, now I think you shared it again with another interview sort of about the 5 things, I wish someone would have told you before you started the business. And that was one of them, I think, how to incentivize younger employees and I guess keep them loyal and on, right? So go a little deeper into that, your learning of that over those years, because again, we all have that, right? We all have young millenniums now or Generation Zs, and they even operate different than the ones you were talking about earlier.
So what I learned over time and have learned to do much better is that every aspiration that I would have as the head of a company, younger people would have too. So I made sure to have the world recognize them as superstars, and to give them unique areas that they could have autonomy over. And importantly, to give them equity so they could share in the growth of the business. And firms split up where the primary person is somehow jealous over the success. So I grew to cherish the growth and success, and to realize that if I wanted to have growth in business in a larger footprint, that it was going to come because people accepted someone else as giving them quality service. And that you could make the argument that in the time it took to train other people, I could do everything better myself. Well, that might be true, but I would do everything myself, right, which gave an unlivable lifestyle. So I've been able to create in the last 20 years a whole set of really talented superstars and rejoice in their success.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and like you said, being a business owner and an entrepreneur myself, we do a lot of times feel like we can do it always better in a sense, right? And therefore could try to control it. At the end of the day, that also means you are the bottleneck in the business to grow. And I'm certain that's, I think, what you're talking about here.
So again, I've been much happier having a whole talented younger generation that can take it the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about the competition here, because when you started, as you said, in the 70s, there wasn't really that many out there. But I know Mark McCormick, of course, with IMG was already there. I think Donald started, shortly after, obviously in golf and tennis, and you are here starting in the American football space. How would you see yourself? And I'm certain you guys all know each other. And met across the years. What's your relationship with them? Of course, Mark is no longer around.
Oh, I greatly enjoyed the success of those people, and those that were pioneers I learned from. And it's so David Falk was doing in basketball what I was doing in football, and I looked at him as a peer, and we had great discussions and talked at times about sort of putting our practices together. It never happened, but brilliant guy, and I admired all the innovations he did. And Mark McCormick came up with the relationship between actually owning the event itself, mm-hmm. and which was a breakthrough, and that formed the model for what came later, where various firms aggregated agencies in a variety of different sports, but then built out a big marketing arm, and then content supplies, so sports themed, television, radio, video games, content, a studio in a virtual sense, not a four-wall sense. And so the merging of all that. And so now we have a number of superpower groups like that are doing it, and it's and the payoff comes in the marketing and merchandising, and so it's a brave new world in sports, which has merged over with entertainment, and there's still a number of independent agencies. There are what I call multinational companies that are pretty dominant in our field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the IMG now, what it is around the world, having merged obviously with multiple entities, and what obviously Mark built initially is a very different beast. So you got some personal stories with one of them. You guys sitting somewhere over a glass of wine or a coffee in the world, and figuring out how to divide and conquer, or it never got that close.
No, we knew where things were going, that because you could see that 3 local TV stations were going to morph into cable television, satellite television, and the dispersion of content platforms was going to mean more sports, more games, more highlight shows, more interview shows, more opinion shows, more feature shows, more entertainment shows, more of everything.
Yeah.
And it was going to create more rights fees, more bidders, and what was a tiny little industry was going to turn into more documentaries, more features, more series, and it was going to be a brave new world. And that those people who were in the content part of the business were going to do quite well.
Right.
Now, the fact that in the United States, football was going to break out our football, NFL football, so that 71 of the top 100 shows were going to be NFL football, which meant that NFL football was not only the most popular sport by 2-1, but the most popular form of televised entertainment.
Right.
That required the foresight to see that baseball, which had been the most popular sport, were there, but while the rest of the world venerated soccer. And so the problem entertainment-wise is that the most popular sport in this country doesn't travel well overseas. And it's so we need to grow soccer from a younger point with academies to get our best athletes in the United States into the most popular sport worldwide.
Correct. Yeah, and later on, I want to talk a bit about sort of comparing some salaries here when we get to that in terms of American football players versus soccer players, or the rest of the world, what we call football players around the world. So that because there's some interesting comparison, and we'll get to that later. Did you ever have soccer players under contract too? Did you ever represent anyone in that space?
No. In 1994, I represented the U.S. team that was playing in the World Cup. Mm-hmm. So I represented them collectively and negotiated with the federation. And that was a team that had players like Tom Dooley, John Harkes, Lexi Lawless. And we keep waiting for the sport to break loose, and every World Cup, you keep thinking it's going to break loose. And I did. Americans like sports with a finite chance of success or failure on every play, and failing that, we like high scoring. So soccer has continuous play without high scoring. So I made a series of suggestions to Americanize soccer and wrote an article in the New York Times. And the fact that I'm still alive is a miracle because it was not well received.
Right, okay.
And so there was a type of soccer called missile that fit American taste better. But I have a friend, Dan Hunt, who owns the Frisco American Soccer Club, and he tells me about all the younger soccer players who are training. And so when that hits, I think we'll be in better shape.
Right, yeah. So you stuck to your guns there, which also, I think, just to maybe check in there, you ever had an office outside of the U.S., or you were always based in America, or you ever tried to put branches around the world like Donald or Mark McCormick did?
No, it's I have probably traveled more in America than virtually anybody except someone selling brushes. But no, Canada, yes, but nowhere else.
Right. So the U.S. was always your playground, where obviously we mentioned it earlier. You generated over $4 billion for athletes.
I explored China. I thought about trying to develop the Chinese market, but no, we've got so many baseball teams, so many football teams, so many basketball teams here. It's been a adequate market.
Yeah, they're more than adequate. I mean, we all know the U.S. is the single biggest sports market on the planet, and the NFL is the single biggest sports property around the world. So you are in a in a good space there, and certain you had, there were plenty of things to do. Now, when you look at the scale of the business, how it grew, as I said, a couple you had your partners, and then you grow. Just give us a sense of staffing, people, maybe the offices you had across the country, or some revenue numbers, just to sort of when it all started, to maybe where it is now or where it was at one point in time.
Well, with Steinberg Morad, I would just say we sold the business for $130 million to Asante in the year 2000.
Right.
And we probably had, it's never been a hugely staffed business. I would say we had probably 6 football agents, 5 baseball agents, and probably 15 staff.
Right.
And then when I bought my own business back, and we probably had from 2003 to about 2010, we had about 6 football agents, a couple baseball agents, and maybe 15 staff. And then in the new iteration of Steinberg Sports and Entertainment, we probably have, I think we have 8 agents and probably a total of about 20 staff.
Right.
And we have agents spread out so that, the main offices are Los Angeles and Newport Beach. We have agents in Seattle, San Francisco, Baltimore, South Carolina, Seattle, San Francisco,
spread across the country.
Yeah. And we have a new partner who's entrepreneur, whose name is Ron Burkle, and he owns a company called Ukaipa.
Interesting. So you basically have always tried to keep, in a sense, the sort of a core team. It's, again, different than IMG, how they grew around the world. Thousands of people now,
it's a very challenging business, and the key is always been to keep fixed expenses low and profitability high.
Absolutely. And it's funny enough, that was Donald Dell's, as I mentioned earlier, he sort of was a mentor to myself. That was probably his biggest comment to me every time. Marcus said, watch your overheads, or what you call fixed cost, because that will kill you. And that obviously killed but it's the challenge in our business where when you grow, and like myself, build companies and offices around Asia. We had at one point in time 8 offices, with 100 people plus people here. There's big overheads when you are operating in cities like Tokyo and others. So, that's so. What would be your learning on it when you say control your fixed cost? Again, as someone who's that experienced like yourself, share that with the younger listeners.
So I'll give you an example. There are football players spread all across the country, but if your primary office is in Los Angeles, the difference between locking down campuses like UCLA and SC, as opposed to recruiting players from New York and Maine, is that all you have to do is get in your car and drive to UCLA and SC.
Right.
As opposed to flying players in from the East Coast.
Right.
So all things being equal, if you could sign players from local schools or schools that are an hour plane flight away, instead of flying families in from across the country, you've just cut down on your expenses dramatically.
Okay.
And if you could use the SoFi Stadium as a place to go see football games, or Arizona or San Francisco, instead of flying to New York when possible, you've just cut down your expenses.
Right.
And if you could take a trip where you were achieving 5 client maintenance goals instead of 1, where you were seeing 5 clients in one trip instead of 1, if you could achieve 6 goals instead of 1, then that would be more cost efficient.
Right. Yeah, so really basic things to just think through and work through. And on the back of it, of course, if you're doing this with a bunch of agents flying around or traveling, closer by, or having multiple meetings, that's where automatically you have huge savings. I can see that. Yeah, makes sense. Very interesting. Leigh, let's go in a slightly different direction here. You sold the business. So we're now here in the year 2000. And now, again, I've had this conversation with many other entrepreneurs. It's one thing, of course, it's a big high selling the company and getting rewarded for it. On the back of it, at the end of the day, it's an end of a journey, right? Something you built. We said it earlier. You started the business in the 70s, and now 25 years later or so, you're selling it for a good chunk of money here. Talk a bit about it. What was the feeling? What was it? You were excited to, get that big check, or, you had a tear in your eye that, some of your life work now is moving on? Or did you stay on with the business after, or what was the sort of arrangement there?
Well, I had to stay on with the business after, and I realized very quickly that what I surrendered was what was most important to me, which was autonomy. Mm-hmm. And, because I had the charitable bent, I was able to allocate prior to that 35% of my time to creating these charitable and community programs. Right. And once I had sold it, the group I'd sold it to was looking for profit. Yep. And that created an inherent conflict. And then ultimately, the company went public, and the new group was not so interested in American sports. The part of it that intrigued me was to build an empire, like we talked about, which would aggregate a number of different agencies under one roof. So I went ahead with their funds and bought another football agency, a basketball agency, a hockey agency, okay, and was going to keep purchasing agencies. But now, all of a sudden, they had a new group that had no interest in the American sports scene and really wanted to go a different direction. So now I'm stuck because they want to cut costs, and that part attracted me. But now they don't want to keep adding agencies. As a matter of fact, they sort of want to cut back. And now I feel stuck and trapped. And so eventually I bought back my football agency and got out of there. But so, I was already fine with the amount of money that I was making before we sold, and had more than enough, and that was a period where the younger agents felt the pressure and they left. And so I got my autonomy back, but I realized what the problem was in that situation. And I was much happier with my firm back.
Right. Well, how long did it take? So you mentioned earlier, I think 99, 2000 you sold. When did you buy it back?
3 years.
3 years later. So you basically lasted about 3 years, which is quite interesting.
I realized that from 1975 to 2000, I had the freedom to sort of choose the projects, and I could go off and go save a baseball team or be head of the committee to save the Rams, or Madeleine Albright and I put together, the Secretary of State, a program to take minefields out of Cambodia and Mozambique and Angola, or I could go off on some project, or I could take time to have Cameron Crowe follow me around for Jerry Maguire, or
Right.
I could be technical advisor on Any Given Sunday, that film, or I could go write a best-selling book. And all of a sudden, someone could tell me I couldn't do those things, and it was a shock. And so all of a sudden, I had my firm back, and I could do all of those things again.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I completely appreciate the feeling there, and what it means bringing someone in, whether you're selling it completely or even if you just bring investors in, right? It always changes dramatically how you operate. Now, I just wanted to share a little more with Asante Sports Management Group, which is the one who bought you. I have to admit, I really don't know much about them. You mentioned their plan was to buy, you ended up buying a bunch of other agencies to build a bigger picture, and then they were bought or they were listed, and then again, that's where it changed, or what happened exactly there?
Yes, so the original plan was changed, and they started putting a lot of pressure for cost cutting. And so I was discontent. They were discontent. And so
they were just trying to maximize profits at the end of the day and not really looking at how to grow further.
I understood their point of view, but it was not the right environment for me.
But yeah, that makes sense. Now let's talk about we're sort of in the early 2000s here. The world has .com fever, and and then a bit later it of course bust. And you kind of alluded to it earlier a bit already that. Yeah, you always felt you were, you had interest way beyond just brokering deals, of course, for these big athletes. But so I think you did create some, what we called websites at the time. I think you did some work with ESPN Sports Center. I think you created some other, online courses and so on. Just talk about that a bit. That's an exciting time of the era.
So that was Athlete Direct that I talked about, where we created the first big athlete website. And I was always able to have vision for the future and where it was going. I went to China and had the only foreign office in the Forbidden City. And we came up with a plan to create a education, a university for Chinese athletes. And there was a big Chinese charity, and I teamed with it, and we held a concert at the Great Wall, which had Alicia Keys as the headliner and Boyz II Men, Cyndi Lauper, and raised a fair amount of money for that charity, and sold the DVDs, and I was thrown a luncheon by every post-war Chinese leader's son or daughter. So it was Mao and Zhou Enlai and the rest of them, and I lectured at Beijing University and came up with a plan to build the first film school in Shanghai. And so anyway, I was sort of ahead of the curve on that. And but as the 2000s went on, a series of reverses happened in my personal life, and my two boys were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is an eye disease that leads to blindness, and they both became blind. And my father died a long death from cancer, and we lost a home in a beach city to mold. And for the first time in my life, I started to experience behavioral problems and drinking too much. And eventually in 2010, I crashed and went finally decided that I had to address it, and I went off to sober living and decided that if nothing else, I'd be sober and I'd be a good father. And so I closed down my business and I gave it to the younger agents, and I worked a 12-step program with a unique fellowship, and last couple of weeks ago I celebrated 12 and a half years of sobriety, but I had to rebuild, and I waited a couple of years until I was was sure that I was behaviorally okay, and then I had to start again by raising money and finding investors who believed in me, and we started the whole process over again.
Wow.
And I formed Steinberg Sports and Entertainment and got funded, and here we went again.
Yeah, you were again. No, and I really acknowledge you for sharing this. And I know publicly there's been obviously, I think, something in your book as well about it. Because, again, clearly there is some lessons there. And the stress you just described, I'm sure you had personally. And I'm really sorry to hear that about your boys. I did not see that anywhere, actually, in the when I was doing my homework. But, and of course, your death of your father. So that would throw a curveball at anyone. I can imagine. Now, thinking back there, and again, without belaboring this point too much, but what is it sort of, if you would now go back to that time and the lessons you learned, or what would you tell someone who has that same challenge, or anything you could share still, and before we move on?
Sure. Nothing in my work life ever particularly threw me, because I would walk into the office every day with the understanding that, notwithstanding how much I had prepared for a certain problem, what our plans were, something might go awry.
Yeah.
And I expected that and understood that. But in my private life, I had the illusion that somehow I could keep my father safe, that I could keep my children safe, that I could provide a house over my, that if I just worked harder and I was more creative and I just spent more energy, that I could protect them all. And of course I couldn't. And what I learned is that you can have these problems in your private life, but you really don't need to connect it to drinking. And you can survive them without using that crutch. And if there are people out there who are struggling and confused and despondent because of problems with addictive substances, who are hopeless, just know there's help out there. And I had gone to a level where I'm sitting on my father's bed in our house in Los Angeles, and I closed up my office and my business, and my only coherent thought was where I could find more vodka. And if you're out there and you're struggling, there is help available, and you don't have to do it alone. And there are 12-step programs, and if you're surrounded by destruction and detritus, it takes some work, but you can get back to a much happier life. And if I could do it, you can do it. And I reestablished my relationship with my kids, and my comeback is continuous sobriety and being a good father. And everything that's happened in conventional success is just a cherry on the top.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great. As I said, I really appreciate that. And like you said, when I did my homework, clearly there were issues, as you said, from alcohol. You had, of course, the litigation there was one of your partners and another financial issue. So it looked like a big mess, and I can see how that turned out here. But let's talk about the new beginning here, the new Steinberg Sports and Entertainment. And all the great things you guys are doing now here. But before we get there, maybe let's go a little back now. I want to talk about the Jerry Maguire and certain other things, of course, course, you've done there. It just tell us a bit about it. Of course, Tom Cruise as Jerry Maguire, sort of playing you, I guess. That's pretty cool. And I'll tell you a fun little story on my side here. So what I recall, the movie, I think, came out around 1996, 97, I think, or in that ballpark, which was about the time when I was setting up my own company. And I must have watched the movie probably 10 times because I got extremely inspired by it. Not that, obviously, I was that type of agent. We were more in a different type of the sports industry, but just him stepping out and doing what he did, obviously, there on his own, inspired me a lot. And as I said, in my early days of my own business, at the first year or two, as usual, when you struggle a bit, that movie really, helped me. So I want to thank you for being there and guiding them along into the movie. But, I just loved the movie and God knows how many times I'll watch it. But tell us a bit about it. What happened behind the scenes, how did it start? And, of course, any other fun stories from it?
So writer-director Cameron Crowe called me up in 1993 and asked if he could follow me around and pick up atmosphere for a film that would center around a sports agent. Mm-hmm. And so he started following me at the NFL draft in 1993. I had the first pick there, Drew Bledsoe. And so he went everywhere I went, and he listened to things that were happening, and he was a fly on the wall, and I told him stories. And then he went to the league meetings in Palm Desert in 1993, and I had a free agent, Tim McDonald, that was trying to find a team to go to. One day, we went up to Tim's hotel room, and Lou Jobs and Moneyline was on CNN in the background, and Cameron was interviewing Tim and asked him what he was looking for in the process, and Tim gestured towards the screen and said, "I'm looking for a team to show me victory. I'm looking for a team to show me respect. I'm looking for a team to show me a big contract." And Cameron wrote the line, "Show me the money." And he went to a series of games with me, and Pro Day at USC, and the Super Bowl, and my Super Bowl party, and sat in my office, and I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. So then he incorporated that into the script, and I was technical advisor, so I had to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that keeps you in a picture didn't get ruined. And he assigned me actors like Cuba Gooding Jr., and I took him to the Super Bowl, and he had to pretend he was a wide receiver client of mine all week, and He hung out with wide receivers. And I had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral with the football, because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have football there. Right. And then there's a lot of life up there on the screen, and for 25 years, I haven't gone out in public to an airport or to a table where someone doesn't run up and either ask me to say or say those 4 words that start with "show me the," and so it was a fun experience.
Yeah, like I said, I absolutely love that movie, and clearly there's some great lines in there, and glad you were a part of that. Now, another one, which again, while we just sticking around the movie world a bit here, is of course Any Given Sunday, Al Pacino, another unbelievable movie, probably another one of my all-time favorites. What were you doing there? I guess you were also consulting on that.
So that movie was Oliver Stone was the director, and I was technical advisor on that one too. And so that originally was supposed to be a rapper named P. Diddy, but he couldn't throw the football. And so Oliver said, "Would you please take a look at him and tell me what you think?" And I said, "Well, powder puff footballs and quarterbacks in college could throw better than him. So unless you're going to double him in every scene, you can't do this." So they fired him, and it gave a young comedic actor his first dramatic role, and that was Jamie Foxx, who I worked with. And I spent an evening with Al Pacino, who knew nothing about football, but he liked boxing. So I helped put him in role and was down in the locker room when he did a big dramatic speech.
Yeah, the famous speech.
And I had to put Cameron Diaz in role, which was not tough duty. And so that was sort of fun. I did a baseball movie called Any Given Sunday with Kevin Costner. And anyway, it was, and a TV series called Arliss, where I gave him all my worst ideas that I could never do in real life, but Arliss did.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, I'm sure you've had some fun with that, working with the actors, and of course creating these amazing movies there. Now let's talk about currently, where your firm is now, and the things you're doing. Of course, Patrick Mahomes is one of your big superstar clients, from what I could see. I'm sure there are others, but let's talk a bit about him for a minute here. Probably the hottest maybe quarterback there is at the moment, or at least over the last year or two. Huge contract, $450 million as far as I could see, for the next 10 years. He had a big signing bonus, and then there was this thing which called the $140 million guarantee. Actually, just explain to me for a minute, what does that mean? What is the $140 million guarantees versus the 450?
He has rolling guarantees so that each year, if they would not go ahead with the contract, they'd make him a humongous payment. But There's no real danger of that. And
so it's like an exit clause is what the guarantee means, is it? Or right, okay.
So back in 1984, I did the biggest contract in the history of sports, which was Steve Young with the USFL. Mm-hmm. And the next time was Patrick Mahomes. So the great thing about that is it's the first time that NFL contracts have actually been at the same par or exceeded baseball contracts in Major League Baseball. So just as that one position quarterback, they're now equivalent to the top of the baseball and basketball market.
Yeah, again, absolutely. The baseball isn't really my world, so I can't really compare it. But I was looking at football, soccer player salaries here, just to get a sense. When you hear 450 million, of course, it's a huge sum, no matter which way you spin it. So it's, I say, in this case, I think it's, let's say, 45 million average a year. I'm not sure whether it ramps up or with the way exactly it's structured. But if you take the biggest soccer stars in the world, like Messi, he's at 97 million, Ronaldo at 70, Neymar at, again, close to 70. So again, soccer players, let's call them here, still making more money than the biggest NFL stars. Which is interesting, right? On one side, the NFL is the single largest sport on the planet, with more money being generated through TV and everything else. But of course, it is a one country pony trick versus football, soccer around the world. What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you have 53 players on an NFL squad.
Right. So yeah, it's a bigger team. I agree. So that, there's maybe a difference to that. Like I said, maybe it's hard to compare one to the other anyway, and maybe it's, but it's just, it's interesting to see because in the US, funny enough, you always hear the big contract numbers. That's when, people look up and go $300 million, $450 million, versus in Europe, it's always mostly quoted on how much he makes every week, right? These are the weekly salaries of someone makes 200,000 pounds, 400,000 pounds, and then they call it week. They don't actually go, it's a X tens of $1 million contract, which is funny. I don't know whether they're trying to make it sound smaller so we don't get too scared when someone gets paid 400,000 pounds a week. But it's just a different form of reporting, I guess. Now, in total, I've read $3 billion, $4 billion. I mean, it's again huge numbers here. And of course, now the agency commissions in the U.S. is very regulated, right? From what I recall, having previous conversations, it's not like in Europe or in football where it is still somewhat more, loose, where agents can have different sort of commissions, and there are many ways of cutting it. But in the U.S., it's very regulated, right? What's the sort of current percentages an agent takes on any of this?
They're regulated by the Players Association, and probably much smaller than in soccer. In football, it's 3% of the money as it comes to the player. In basketball, it's 4%, and in baseball, it's 5%. Now, that's of the player contract. In endorsements, is unregulated, so it can be anywhere from 10 to 25% of the endorsement.
Right. And was your firm involved in then helping to find endorsement deals, or was that not something you guys were doing?
No, we do that.
We do that as well. Okay. So let's talk about some of that side of it. Do you have any sort of great examples of some big, endorsement deals, sponsorship deals you cut for any of your big superstars?
Well, Patrick Mahomes does Head and Shoulders. He does State Farm. He does. He's got a massive amount of endorsement deals that he does. So the key is to stay in each product category. So you can only do one deal in each product category. So automotive is one product category. It's ketchup is something else.
Now, a big superstar like him, we talked about, he makes $45 million on his salary plus whatever other bonuses maybe. What would he, and I'm not saying specifically him, but say in general, what is in addition you could see these clients are making through endorsements the biggest there? They doubling their salaries, or what is sort of your normal experience?
No, the biggest money in American sports in endorsements is made by golfers.
Okay.
Now, LeBron James would be an exception. The basketball players have shoe contracts, and because I once had lunch with Phil Knight, and I said, why do you pay, $60-70 million to a basketball player and $10 million to a football player? He said, well, if you sold 100 million pairs of basketball shoes and 30,000 pairs of cleated shoes, where would you put the money?
Right.
But it's basketball players make the most money from shoe contracts, but because of the wealth of men that own companies, it's golfers make the most money in endorsements, except for a certain number of basketball stars. The football quarterbacks do quite well, but not, 50, 70, $100 million.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And where do you think that comes from? Is it because they got a helmet on, you don't really see them, you don't recognize them as much as, players where, of course, they don't wear gear?
That's the exact point. You see the face and the shoes of a basketball player, and golfers appeal to a really wealthy demographic.
Of course. Absolutely. Which is interesting because I'd love your thoughts on this. I'll give you a little list here. The billionaire athletes which have come out of sports so far. On the top, of course, it's Michael Jordan, who is, again, reported $2.6 billion there. You have Tiger Woods right after with about $2.1 billion. And then you have two golfers which have been in this game forever, Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, both over close to about $1.5 billion. Then you get into the football world with Ronaldo of 1.2. You have a boxer there, Floyd Mayweather, 1.2. Then LeBron, about a bit over $1 billion, Messi, Michael Schumacher, F1 driver, and then, of course, the recently retired Roger Federer with over $1 billion in earnings over his career. And there probably are some more, but these were sort of the top 10. So it's an interesting mix of superstars. Many, of course, are Americans. Now, your thought on this? When a young kid now is coming out of high school or out of college and starting to play a game, whatever it is he's playing, right? And in this case, whether it's basketball or golf or, boxing or tennis here, there obviously are ways to become a billionaire, which is maybe the dream of many around the world. How do you deal with that? How do you manage those expectations of the parents of the kid and not get their head in the cloud? Because, yes, those superstars made that money, but, there was a reason. There's only a few of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, first of all, let's talk about NILs.
Correct.
Because we now have a system for the last year in which a high school football quarterback can start doing marketing,
right,
and start branding himself, or a high school basketball player.
Yep.
Is
it high school or college? Is it both?
High school.
High school. Okay.
There are no rules anymore.
Right.
So starting last July 1st, they told any college player they could do it, but that opened the doors for any high school player to do it.
Okay.
And now you have high schoolers doing it.
Wow.
And so a lot of this is going to depend on how grounded the parents are. And then if they sign with marketing agents, how grounded they are. And in terms of managing the expectations, because that player still has to perform. Yep. And before they get grandiose, they have to have skills that keep them, grounded in this whole thing. So this is a lot about branding and social media. So it's what their brand logo looks like on social media. So the currency of this is how many followers they have on TikTok and Twitter.
Like Ronaldo, exactly.
Right. So what's gonna rule the day in terms of commercial endorsements or monetizing that website or the Twitter feed or anything else is how many followers they have, and that's going to depend on their ability to produce interesting content. And so it's the skill set's going to be who can help them design an attractive and interesting presence up on the internet. So it's going to be a combination of how they perform primarily, but then who's got the ability to attract viewers and followers. And the other source of income, going back to your previous question, is a number of these athletes are taking equity in businesses they endorse.
Right.
So they're taking equity in businesses they can help grow.
Yeah.
So, and then if there's a liquidity event, they ride the growth of the equity and then they have a liquidity event and they can reap millions from that.
Absolutely.
So that was started by the rapper who did The Water. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Yeah,
but
50 Cent.
50 Cent, but there you went. And
yeah, absolutely.
Patrick Mahomes owns part of Hyperice. And so these athletes now are smart enough to know that if they're lending brand, they should take a monetary fee, but they should also take
a
equity.
piece of the action. Yeah. And is that part of what you're involved in as well? Do you help negotiate some of this, or is that again done by someone else?
Of course. No. I mean, Steinberg Sports has a really sharp CEO, Chris Cabot, who does the majority of our endorsement deals, and he's really savvy about that. But, for example, Patrick Mahomes took an ownership interest in the Kansas City Royals baseball team.
Okay.
And his wife owns part of the Kansas City women's soccer team.
Right. Okay. Right. So they're basically bringing their fame and name and likeness to other ventures, whether it is, regular business or even other sports teams, and drive the growth on the back of it. I like that. There are plenty of good examples out there for sure. And that's what I like about when your introduction, which we went through earlier, building athletes into standalone brands. I think that's really captures, I think, what you want to do, right? To create these brands, which then on the field generate the returns for the athlete, but also go beyond, right? Is that sort of part of your bigger vision?
Yes, and additionally, you'll see them go into the production business. So they will create content under their own production company.
Yeah. LeBron James has a couple of there with, I think, several partners.
That's and right. You'll see more of our athletes doing that. They'll create motion pictures, documentaries, all sorts of game shows and different content.
That again, there's just, and this is the fun part of it, right? The power of an athlete's brand, if you do it the right way, and of course, if you stay out of trouble. Let's say take Tiger Woods as a example both ways, right? He's a super brand in so many levels. That's why he made it $2 billion, but also crashed and burned on many levels and had to rebuild itself again, right? So, and that's the tough part.
This is where we sit them down at the very beginning and say, you are living under a microscope. And if you are not willing to hold yourself to a higher standard, and that means not driving with alcohol in your system, not going out into a place where alcohol is served, and having people around you so you don't get into a fight, being careful about your interactions with the opposite sex, never putting your hands on anyone in anger, then play on a sandlot. No one will have anything to say about your behavior, but you are held to a higher standard. And if you accept that, prevention is the best way to avoid anything that will knock you off this path.
Absolutely. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on, you've worked with so many of these superstars over the years. What is the trait, that one thing, what separates them, right? You've heard about it in movies, you've whatever, but you experience it, right? You see what makes, Patrick Mahomes and the Troy Aikmans of the world different to the next guy. What is it, what you feel, is it that tunnel vision? Is it that whatever, how they live and prepare, or what is it, what you see?
Well, let's start with an incredible work ethic that never stops. So these are people who are in shape every day, who work out all the time, who are constantly studying a game plan, constantly aspiring to get better, who so preparation all the time. What you see is the tip of the iceberg. What's underneath it is this insatiable appetite to succeed that manifests itself that way. The second thing is performance under pressure. So the quarterback's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the center's looking at the quarterback like he's on hallucinogens for his play calling. The game's getting out of hand. What does he do now? How do you perform in adversity? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, elevate his level of play in critical adversity to put a team on his back and perform then in critical circumstances? Because most athletic performances come down to a few critical plays.
Right.
So it's the ability to shake off adversity and perform in critical situations.
Right. Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And the fun part, the best part of that is what you just shared. It doesn't just relate to sports; it relates to life in general, and for sure business as well. Right? That focus.
Listen, we're all going to get pushed back and knocked back. The question is, can you be resilient? Can you rise again? Yeah. Guarantee you will in your life get knocked back, and it's okay to take a few seconds to recover, but can you spring back again and shake off what just happened and perform?
Absolutely. No, I love that. And looking back at my own career here, that's for sure the case. It is always coming back. It's the comeback which counts, not the knockdown. Now, let's sort of start wrapping it up here with the last couple of questions for you. One is, and I know you mentioned it earlier, you sort of obviously now as built the business up again. You kind of created an environment where you're handing over and having succession plans. But where do you see the future? What is it where you, after been in this business now for 4 decades, where do you see it's heading? And maybe talk a bit about the world of gaming and esports, because I think you were a board member at a gaming company ages ago already, and obviously saw that as well. Just share a bit of that.
I went down to Dallas and was in a big auditorium with about 8,000 people, and I watched the Dallas Fuel, an esport team and company, play Houston, and all these young people were sitting there. They weren't playing the e-game. They were watching these people play it.
Correct.
And they were standing up and screaming like these players were rock stars. And I told somebody, I've seen the future. It's right here. Right. And these people are, they're teaching classes and doing, you can get a major in esports. So clearly you got to look at this. But one of the things I'm working on is biomed breakthroughs that can stimulate energy and focus for athletes at the end of a game, can recover them to service more quickly, can deal with the issue of concussion, and then for the rest of the population, drive cognitive acuity at a higher rate, and extend life in anti-aging. So they're hyperbaric oxygen, light stem cells, cognitive process called RTMS, another one that operates around the concept of neuroplasticity. I think there's going to be a health wellness revolution. I'm going to take this into pro sports and collegiate sports, and then for the rest of us, I think we can finally cure concussion, which the world doesn't know about yet. And I think we can help more longevity for the rest of us and better cognitive function. So I'm putting this all together as a package and going to roll it out soon.
Wow. I love that. And again, it just shows your ability to consistently come up with new things and continuously evolving who you are as a business person and as a man. So that is really cool. And I look forward to hearing more about it. Maybe when we have a chance to talk again in the future, maybe we can talk more about it even. And so you're working with, I guess, different groups, different companies to develop some of these new ideas and concepts and medications, etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process of writing another book, and I'm about to start a new podcast, and just a few things in my spare time.
Here we go. Join the podcast. So that's cool. Well, hopefully one day maybe I'll become a guest on yours. Yes, but yeah, we should mention that you do have a second book out, which is called The Agent, my 40-year career making deals and changing the game. So that's the one I'm going to get soon here. I didn't manage to catch that before we had our call here, but it sounds exciting and for sure is on my list. Now, I know you do a few other things, and this is sort of really maybe my last question here. Outside of, what we just talked about, I believe you're a adjunct professor as well. Of course, you have other roles as an industry leader, what you're doing in philanthropy. Maybe just share the last few things there, to wrap it up and round up this amazing career of yours.
So we hold agent academies for young aspiring agents. We're having one in Las Vegas, November 13, 14, 15. We teach people how to recruit, how to negotiate, how to set up a charitable foundation. It's if you go to SteinbergSpeaks.com. You can find it. I'm trying to create a next generation of principled, ethical sports professionals to bring them into the field. And we also do sports career conferences, but this will jumpstart somebody's career. And I've done 27 of these and trained a whole bunch of people. So if you're interested, check it out.
Definitely, yeah. We'll make sure that the podcast will spell that out properly, where to find that. And again, thank you so much for your time, sir. It was a real honor and pleasure talking to you. Like the movie inspired many, I think this podcast and clearly your stories will inspire many others. And I wish you all the power here for many more years to go, and hopefully we'll have a chance to A, meet in person, and B, talk again.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day there.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.